Hello everyone, welcome to the Eternal Card Breakdown. We're going to be talking about the new promo today. There's a new promo for the month. It is called Traver's Farm. We have a little bit of backstory on Horace Traver again, where they've been, what they've been doing. Primarily, the storyline is that they have been walking back and forth between Zolta and the prime plane of Myria, or whatever you want to call it. So yeah, Zolta to Myria, and then back to Zolta in pursuit of nightmares. But not without taking a little stop at Traver's Farm, our new site, a 4-cost colorless site, 4/4, that says Strangers cost 1 less, Stranger's Agenda, Stranger's Mark, Reunite, and Unity Within, which is a card that gives a +1/+1 to a unit and an additional +1/+1 to any unit that shares a type with it. Let me double check that. One of your units and each of your units that shares a type with it gets +1/+1. So overall, that's not an amazing setup. The final card, of course, off of it is Triumphant Stranger, the 5-color stranger that is a 1/1 with +1/+1 for each stranger, and at the start of your turn, create and play a random stranger. So this card generates a lot of cards on its own value, but by and large is only really good in stranger type decks. Nonetheless, it's pretty interesting because it signals that there's going to be strangers most likely in the upcoming set, or at least some stranger representation. In addition, as Traver's Farm is being released, Verret is being revealed as a stranger to no one who has been following the lore. Surprise. Yeah, so Horace Traver is Verret. Verret is hanging out at Traver's Farm, and in general, we are looking at like a new stranger set in addition to the tricolor stuff, which could mean tricolor fixing strangers. That seems like a fairly likely possibility. I would expect some sort of different mechanic on that front, but it might be something that replaces like cargo or something along the, or even some of the pledge cards for like fixing in that setup. So there's some speculation as to what can happen in Echoes of Eternity. We'll see if we'll see more strangers. At the moment, we at least have a colorless stranger card that makes strangers a little bit more interesting in throne mode. As far as this card's power level is concerned, it's not available really in Expedition because the only stranger in Expedition is Verret, which means that not only does Traver's Farm not produce a lot of strangers, but also Triumphant Stranger only produces Verret, which is not an amazing time. I think it can produce other Triumphant Strangers. I think it used to be able to. I don't know if it does anymore, but duplicating itself still isn't all that amazing. There was like a lot of stuff happening with that. But by and large, so that's not going to be like an amazing card in Expedition by any means until Expedition changes up. So unless we do see some strangers, Traver's Farm is going to be a pretty dead promo there. In Throne, I'm also skeptical of its value. I think that the Strangers cost 1 less ability is super useful, and indeed if you're playing strangers, there's a lot of interesting things that this opens up. In particular, it opens up a lot of stranger light decks where you are playing with 1 or 2 units that you intend to Strangers Mark with Traver's Farm, and then a couple of strangers to sort of buff, fix, or set up, and then finally following up with Unity Within to grab or finally following up with the Victorious Stranger out of Traver's Farm to sort of make the whole Stranger thing tie together. If you are playing a Victorious Stranger off of Traver's Farm, that card will win the game eventually, no matter what you are doing, even if you're playing no Strangers. So the fact that this is a 4-cost, 4 durability site means that it is something that is at least a pretty interesting distraction you can splash into 1 or 2 color decks and maybe do some things with. On the other hand, this card is definitely very slow to activate. It doesn't have a lot of onboard value. Stranger's Mark does nothing. Reunite only works if you have strangers in your deck. And Unity Within, while providing you with a +1/+1 bonus, is overall a little bit not too great. It's at least a temporary value similar to Unlock Potential, and that's not an unreasonable thing to get off of Traver's Farm. But if you aren't playing strangers, you really can't play this card, which isn't too big of a surprise since it is a colorless site. It's also a stranger site, so good design on that part at the very least. But also, strangers have really fallen out of the meta, and like Throne is just like, I've talked about this quite a bit. I think that Throne is a little bit too high power level for basically any deck that isn't just going to be composed of entirely good cards, and Strangers by and large do not have entirely good cards on their side. You don't have access to a wide variety of useful 2-drops, 1-drops, a couple of good 1-drops, maybe a good 3-drop, and then like beyond that, like everything is a little bit stat inefficient, everything is very synergy dependent, and then everything that you're going to be up against is going to be removal piles, that kind of thing. So while Traverse Farm is pretty interesting, if you're a high-level player, I think it's not of terrible interest at the moment, beyond just something to mess around with and play around with strangers with. I think there are some really cool options that are going to be available with this card, and I assume that as a precursor to Echoes of Eternity, this card will be a lot stronger in Expedition formats to come, but I'm skeptical of its value in Throne even after all of the strangers in Echoes of Eternity come out, just because strangers by and large are a pretty vulnerable and difficult thing to assemble, and vulnerable and difficult things to assemble do not survive for long in the world of extremely loud combos and very, very just like efficient decks that are just full of huge beaters. We played around with this with a Crown deck. We had a delightful time. We can show it off for a second here. It did not have any luck because it was, of course, ridiculous, but by and large had a lot of fun with it. So this was our randomonium twist on it, and we were just playing around with basically like setting down Traverse Farm, grabbing it, using like Crown of Possibilities, that kind of thing. Had a delightful time with it, won a couple of games, but by and large couldn't get any traction with it for obvious reasons. It's just like a sort of slow, interesting Crown deck, and slow, interesting Crown decks have not been good for a while. I think that Strangers could potentially fit into a tier 3 deck in Throne with this card. It definitely does add a lot of power level to Strangers, but I just don't think it's enough for the card to really be justified in Throne or Expedition. Nonetheless, that does mean that we are gonna be seeing something in the new set that's going to be Stranger focused. I think that this is fairly likely to be a preview of Strangers in Expedition, so that's something that we can definitely work around with and have a delightful time with. So I think I'm interested to see what this card does in Expedition. It should be a lot of fun. As a promo, I think this is a solid like D- overall, but it's fun to play around with, and if it is good, I'm actually not sure how I'm going to feel about it. I think that it being good really means that your opponent has to be in a strategy that you're very able to read and very able to sort of play around. So there's a pretty good likelihood that you'll be able to at least adapt to it in the meta. I think as far as colorless sites go, this is definitely probably the best available option for a colorless site. A tribal site that cares about one of the worst tribes in the game and generally does some interesting things with it. So yeah, let's see if we can see some powerful Strangers and Echoes of Eternity, and until then, we'll be speculating on further spoilers in the future. But thank you so much for watching. We will be back with more brews very, very soon. I believe tomorrow, and maybe even a little bit before that. And once again, I am Pojo. You can find me on Twitch, Twitter, YouTube, and Patreon if you are so inclined to support. Thank you so much for watching. Have a lovely evening, and see you next time.